Chapter 8 of Compensation Management will talk about the designing pay levels, the mixed, and the pay structure. Now, this chapter will focuses on the major decisions and techniques that will involve in determining an organization's external competitiveness policy. Now, it will establish pay levels and pay mixes in the forms and designing pay structures even. Now, most organizations survey other employees for their pay practices to determine the rates competitors pay. Then, based on the survey results, an employer will consider how it is wishes to position its total compensation in the market that would lead, that would match, or that would lag its competitors. Now, in this chapter, the policy position decision may differ for different business units and even for different job groups within inside the single organization. Now, an organization's competitive position policy is going to be translated into practice by setting a pay policy guidelines which will serve as reference in the points around which pay grades and ranges or bands are designed. Now, there are 7 major decisions that are going to be involved in setting an externally competitive pay and designing the corresponding pay structures. So, this includes the following. Specify the employer's competitive pay policy is number 1. Number 2 is define the purpose of the survey. Number 3 is select relevant market competitors. Number 4 is design the survey. Number 5, interpret the survey of its results and construct the market line from the results. And then number 6 is construct a pay policy line that reflects the external pay policy. And number 7, balance competitiveness within the internal alignment through the use of ranges, through the use of flat rates, and through the use of order bands. Now, the chapter will also include with a discussion on the issues associated with the combination of the internal structure, which is under the job evaluation results, with the external market rates. Now, the internal alignment and the external competitiveness will merge together in a pay structure which has 2 aspects. So what are these? The pay policy line and the pay ranges. Now, the pay policy line will translate an organization's external competitive policy into practice, while the use of pay grades and ranges or bands will offer flexibility to deal with pressures from both external and internal pressures on pay decisions. Now, the process of balancing pressures from both external and internal pressures is a matter of judgment. Now, de-emphasizing the internal alignment may lead to unfair treatment among employees and inconsistently with the fundamental culture of an organization is going to be considered also. On the other hand, neglecting external competitive pay practices will greatly affect the ability to attract and hire applicants who are matching an organization's needs, and the external pay relationship also will impact the labor cost that will entail, and therefore the ability to compete in the product and service market category. After the discussion, the students will be able to identify the major decisions in establishing external competitive pay. And then also will be able to describe the purposes of the salary survey. After the discussion of Chapter 8, you will be able to learn about the discussions in the importance of defining the relevant market and pay survey and be able to explain the steps involved in designing a pay survey. Now, the lesson will also give us lessons that would describe the key issues that will be involved in interpreting the results of a pay survey. and then able to discuss the use of pay grades and pay ranges and their relationship to internal alignment and external competitiveness. Okay, now um, in the determination of the externally competitive pay levels and structure, now we specify the competitive pay policy. Now, when you say specifying this competitive pay policy, it's translating the external pay policy into practice that will require information on the external market. Now, surveys will provide the data for translating the policy into pay levels, pay mixes, and the structures. Now, what is a survey? A survey is being defined, no, as a systematic process of collecting and making judgments about the compensation paid by other employees. Now, what is the purpose of the survey? So, an employer may conduct or participate in a survey for the following reasons. So, to adjust the pay level in response to changing rates paid by competitors, and to set the mix of pay forms relative to that paid by competitors, and then to establish or price its pay structure, and to analyze pay-related problems, and to estimate the labor cost of product or service that the market competitors. Now, how do we adjust pay level? Up to how much? How much to pay? No, okay. So most organizations make adjustment to employees' pay on a regular basis, and this adjustment can be based on one or more of the following issues. What are these? Overall upward movement of pay rates caused by competitions for people in the market. Another one is the pay adjustment level is the performance. Another one is the ability to pay. And then the terms specified in a contract. Okay, so these are the adjustments that can be based on the following. No? Okay, now, when you say adjust pay mix, so in what forms? Okay, so adjustment to the different forms of pay competitors use. So what are these? These are base, bonus, and stock benefits. And the relative importance they place on each form occur no less frequently than adjustments to overall pay levels. Now, another one is that it is unclear why changes to the pay mix occur uh, less frequently than changes in the pay level. Why? It might be due to the following reasons. Number one is high cost associated with the redesign of the pay mixes. And then another one is the inertia from the employees. And then another one is the insufficient attention from the compensation managers and employers. And the external pressures that assets, for example, the healthcare costs, stock values, government regulations, union demands, and competitors' pay mix. So there. And then since some pay forms may affect employee behavior more than the others, now collecting information on total compensation, the mix of pay competitors use, and the cost of various pay forms is partly or increasingly important. Next is adjust pay structure. Now, many employers use surveys to validate their job evaluation results. And since the job structure resulting from internal job evaluation, it may not match competitors' pay structures in the external market. Thus, the reconciliation or reconciling these differences is a major issue for them. Now, another consideration is that market pricing mimics competitors' pay structure. So, it's a given where the organization actually rely on market surveys to establish the internal structures rather than integrating an internal and external structures. Therefore, an accurate information and informed judgment are necessary and vital for making all decisions. Okay. Now, the study special situations in terms like this. So, information from specialized surveys will shed light on specific pay-related problems. And special studies will focus on unusual turnover in a specific job or current pay practices for targeted groups, such as the attorneys, patent, retail sales managers, or secretaries, or software engineers. So these are, the things that has to be considered. Now, the estimate competitors' labor cost will also be part of the loop. Now, how do you go over? What are the considerations for this? In the estimate competitors' labor cost, the employers are increasingly using survey data as part of employers' uh, broader effort to gather competitive intelligence. Now, the companies are examining also the competitors' pay practices to better understand how competitors achieve their market share and price their products or services. Now, the industry-wide labor costs will also estimate and are reported in the Employment Cost Index. And this index will allow a firm to compare changes in its average cost to an all-industry or specific industry average. And ultimately, this comparison may have limited value, no, since industry averages may not reflect relevant competitors. Now, select relevant market competitors. So how? To make decisions about pay level mix and structures, a relevant labor market must be defined, and that will include employers who will compete in one or more of the following areas. So these are the same occupational or the same occupations or skills. The employees within the same geographic area and the same products and services. So these are the relevant market competitors consideration. Now, um, in the external competitiveness strategy for top executive like Microsoft and Google, now as the importance and complexity of qualification increase, the geographic limits also increase. And then at the same time, the competition tend to be national or international or for managerial and professional skills and local or regional for clerical and production skills. So these are the things that would be considered also. Now, in the relevant labor market by geographic and employee group, the generalizations will be summarized now in terms of uh, in this area, in this consideration. Now, in areas with high concentrations, in concentration of skills like professionals like scientists, engineers, and managers, the primary market comparisons may be regional, with the national data used only for as secondary. Now, some larger firms ignore the local market conditions and then emphasizing internal alignment even and across geographic areas to facilitate the use of the virtual teams. Another one is that the research suggests that if skills are tied to a particular industry, an underwriters, actuaries, and claims representatives are to insurance to the market should be defined on an industry basis. Uh, Now, however, if a certain skills, for example, accounting, sales, clerical, are not actually limited to one particular industry, then that industry considerations are less important. Now, from the perspective of cost control and ability to pay, including the competitors in the product or service market is critical. However, this becomes a problem when the major competitors are based in countries with lower pay rates such as the countries like China and Mexico. Now, while the quantity of data is available for international comparison, uh, and that comparison is improving, using the data to adjust pay requirement will take a lot of judgment. And one must remember that pay practices of foreign companies can disrupt the emerging local markets in developing economies like the Philippines. Now, the fuzzy market, when you say fuzzy market, so there are new organizations and jobs fused together that is diverse in knowledge and experience. So, and that is very much relevant in the market that appears more like fuzzy market. Now, organizations with unique job structures are finding it hard to get comparable market data and are placing more emphasis on the external market data at the same time. Now, how do we design the survey? Now, a consulting firm may offer a wide variety of surveys now covering almost every job, family, and industry group, unimaginable and imaginable. Now, the survey design will involve considering the following issues. So, it's important for us to be integrated and be known and familiarized with these issues. So, these are the following. Who should be involved in the survey design? And then, how many employers should be included? And then, which jobs should be included? And what information should be collected? So, these are the things that you will have to consider. Now, who should be involved? So, in most organizations, the responsibility for managing survey will lie with compensation manager. Now, in some situations, outside consulting firms are typically used as third-party protection from possible price fixing lawsuits. Now, the survey participant may be guilty of price fixing if the overall effect of the information exchange is to interfere with competitive prices and artificially hold down wages. Lawsuits have been filed alleging that the direct exchange of survey data violates the Section 1 of the Sherman Act, which outlaws conspiracies in restraint of trade. And then identifying participants' data by company name is also considered price fixing. Now, how many employees are needed? The number of employers are to be included. The number of employers to include depends on the circumstances of the organization. Now, for example, in the national surveys that is going to be conducted by a consulting firm, that would often include more than 100 employers. And then clients of these consultants often stipulate special analysis that report pay rates by selected industry groups, geographic region, and or pay levels. Now, what are publicly available data? So the Bureau of Labor Statistics is one. In our case, is the PSA. Is the major source of publicly available compensation data for cash, bonus, and benefits, but not stock ownership. Now, it publishes extensive information on various broadly defined occupations in different geographic areas. While some private sector firms may track the rate of change in the data as a cross-check on other surveys, the data are not specific enough to be used alone. Now, another one is the tailoring analysis to specific industry segments. The select companies and specific job contents is not feasible. Another one is word of mouse. Mouse, not mouth. A click of the mouse makes a wealth of data available to everyone, and means that managers must be able to explain the salaries paid to employees as compared to those a mouse click away. Now, unfortunately, the quality of salary on the web is highly suspect. Okay? Now, in the free data survey or survey data on the web for programmer from the US Bureau of Labor statistics are available actually in salary.com. So, even probably here in the Philippines. So, I think we have some web applications that would determine salaries averaging and common salaries being received by the labor forces. Now, many surveys but few are validated. So there are many surveys actually. So opinions about the value of constant consultant surveys are rampant. rampant but the research is not actually, so there. So many firms select one survey as their primary source and then use others to cross-check or validate the results. Now, some firms actually routinely combine the results of several surveys and weigh each survey in a composite based on a judgment of quality of the data reported. Now, for staffing decisions, what happens? The employment test designers report the test performance against a set of standards, that is reliability, validity, for market surveys and analysis. And similar indices and standards do not even exist. Now, no systematic study of the effects of differences in market definition, participating firms, types of data collected, the quality of data, the analysis performed, and the result is available. Now, which job is to be included in the survey? Now, a general guideline is to select a few employers and jobs as necessary to accomplish the purpose of the survey to encourage participation. And there are several approaches to selecting jobs for inclusion. So, number one is for you to be able to benchmark job approach. Benchmark job approach. And this job have stable job content and are common across different employers and included the sizable number of employees. Now, if the purpose of the survey is to price the internal structure, then benchmark job can be selected to include the entire structure. Now, the degree of match between the survey's benchmark jobs and each company's benchmark is assessed by various means, such as installing the same job evaluation plan in the survey participating companies by the consultant, or asking participant to judge the degree of the match. Now, benchmark. The percentage of jobs in organization that match to salary survey jobs are low to high approach. When you say low to high approach, that is if an organization uses a skills or competency-based structure, it may not have benchmark jobs to match with the jobs of competitors that use the traditional job-based approach. Now, this approach will involve identifying the lowest and highest paid benchmark jobs for the relevant skills in the relevant market, and to use the wages for these jobs as anchors for the skill-based structure. Now, these jobs as anchors for the skill-based structures now given. Now, work at various levels within the structure can then be slotted between the anchors, although the accuracy of the data and the procedure is not ensured. Okay, benchmark conversion or survey leveling approach. When there is no match in job content between the organization's jobs and the survey jobs, the difference can be quantified to obtain an estimate of their relative value and guidance for adjusting the market data. For example, the job evaluation system of a company can be used to identify the magnitude of difference between job evaluation to or for internal job and survey jobs evaluation points. Now, informations are important. What information to collect? Now, there are three basic types of data that are typically requested. Information about the organization, information about the total compensation system, and specific pay data on each incumbent in the jobs under study. Another information to collect is that no survey includes all the data included in the discussion. The data collected depend on the purpose of the survey, on the jobs, and the skills included. Now, organization data. Data collected includes the similarities and differences amongst the organizations in the survey. And these are the relationship data and the financial information included. Now, the information is used to group firms by the size and not to analyze competitors' performance. Traditionally, competitors' data was not used to compare competitors' productivity. However, times are changing. Now, metrics of organizations' performance, meaning the turnover and revenues, and outcomes of performance, meaning market share, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, and recruiting, which is the yield ratio, are being collected as part of competitive intelligence. Now, in the total compensation data, information on all basic types of pay forms are required to assess the total pay package and competitors' practices. The data collected will include base pay. The base pay is the amount of cash the competitors decided each job and incumbent is worth. Second data to be collected is total cash. And total cash includes the base, the bonus, and the profit sharing. That indicates competitors' use of performance that is based on cash payments. And number 3 is the total compensation. That will include total cash plus stock options and benefits that will reveal the total value of the employee and the overall value of the work in itself. Okay. Interpret survey results and construct a market line. The greatest challenge of compensation surveys is to understand how to evaluate the information. Second is the analysis of results and the use of a statistic in the to construct a market pay line that will follow the collection of data. Then interviews with compensation professionals will indicate that there is a lack of consistency in analyzing survey data. Now, you verify the data. Now, a first step is to check for the accuracy of the job matches, the job anomalies, age of data, the nature of the organization. So these are the things that is verifiable. Now, the accuracy of match in the survey data is if a company job is similar but not identical, then survey leveling can be used. And this approach will involve multiplying the survey data by some factors. The factors that the analyst judges to be the difference between the company job and the survey job. And this approach leaves the objectivity of the decisions that is open to challenge. Now, when you say anomalies, it's perusing actual salary data that will provide an analyst with a sense of the quality of the data that would help identify any areas for additional consideration. And then anomalies may include the following. Does any one company dominate? Do all employers show similar patterns? Or are these any outliers? So these are the things that are, would include in the anomalies. Analysis of the anomalies may also indicate additional information about the competitors' pay policies. For example, a competitor may deliberately differentiate itself with pay as part of its strategy. Okay, so that's one. Now, how do we analyze? Statistic analysis. The next step will involve the statistical analysis of the raw data. We can use the descriptive statistical techniques that will include frequency distribution. In the frequency distribution, it will help us, the user, visualize information and may highlight anomalies. Although the shape of the frequency distribution may vary, usually shapes may reflect problems with job matches. And then widely dispersed pay rates also will be determined, or employers with widely divergent pay policies will also be shown in the frequency distribution. Now, under the frequency distribution, the central tendency, the descriptive statistical technique is the central tendency. Now, in the central tendency, a measure of central tendency will reduce a large amount of data into a single number. And it will define commonly used measures. The distinction between mean and weighted mean is also important. Now, next is the variation. Now, in the variation, it is the distribution of rates. The rates around the measure of central tendency variations. And it will tell us how rates are spread out in the market. Now, it measures of variations include the standard deviation, quartiles, and percentiles. In the quartiles and percentiles are common measures of variation in salary survey analysis. So, quartiles and percentiles. Now, we update the data. No? So, wages paid, survey data. No? So, there. Wages paid by competitors are constantly changing and are adjusted at different times. Now, survey data are often updated in the process often called aging or trending. Now, that's part of the forecast, the competitive rates for the future date when the pay decisions will be implemented. Now, the amount to update is based on several factors. Okay? The amount of update is based on several factors, and that will include the historical trends in the labor market and the prospect for the economy in which the employer operates, and the manager's judgment, among others, are to be considered also. Now, although some recommend using the Consumer Price Index, which is CPI, that measures the rate of change in prices for goods and services in the product market, and not the wage changes in the labor market. Okay, so it is not actually advisable to do so. Construct a market pay line. Now, development of a market pay line involves making decisions about which benchmark job to include, which companies to include, and which measures to pay to use. Okay? Measures of pay to use. Now, a market line will link a company's benchmark jobs on the horizontal axis. The internal structure are included with the market rates paid by the competitors based on the market survey. On the vertical axis to be placed. Now, it summarizes the distribution of the going rates paid by competitors in the market. So, what are these? Now, a market line may be drawn freehand or using statistical techniques such as the regression analysis. And then the regression technique will provide the statistical predictions by using the pattern observed in the actual data. And it will smooth a large amount of data while minimizing variations. Now, setting pay for non-benchmark jobs. The pay for the non-benchmark jobs are those jobs for which there is no good match among jobs included in the pay survey. Now, it can be set using the market pay lines. Now, the pay for the non-benchmark jobs can be calculated by using an approach similar to survey leveling. Now, it can be calculated using the pay benchmark and the relative way attached to the job points of both the jobs, job evaluating points of both of the jobs. Now, it could also be calculated based on using the regression analysis. And then, however, the regression line smooth the relationship, resulting in a small difference in predicted base pay. Now, it should be noted that there is no one right way to analyze each survey data. Now, the fast cut example are intended to provide some insights into the kinds of calculations that are useful and the assumptions that underlie salary surveys. Now, combining internal structure and the external market rates. Now, at this point, two parts of the total pay model will be merged. Now, the internally aligned structure is shown on the horizontal axis. The salaries paid by relevant competitors for those benchmark job as measured by the survey will be considered external competitive data and will be shown in the vertical, excuse me, in the vertical axis. Now, develop pay grades. The internal alignments and external competitiveness come together in the pay structure, which has two aspects: the pay policy line and the pay ranges. From pay policy to practice, the pay policy line now. So the next decision is to translate the external competitive policy into practice. Now there are three ways to translate the external competitive policy into practice, and that will include the choice of measure, updating, and the policy line as a percent of market line. Now, choice of measure. When you say choice of measure, this approach will involve using the measures such as the percentiles and the quartiles in relation to the competitor's pay structure. For example, a company can use a specific percentile for base pay and another percentile for total compensation as a compensation measure in its regression. Now, updating. So what happens here? This approach will involve updating the pay policy. Now, using the match, the lead, and the lag concept. Now, in keeping with the year, start of the plan year, and according to pays out of the rate decided upon throughout the year. Now, the pay line as a percent of market line. Now, this approach will involve specifying a percent above or below the regression line. So, which is the basis of the market line that an employer intends to match, and then drawing a new line at this higher or lower level. Now, therefore, there are alternatives among competitive pay policies, and there are alternative ways to translate policy into practice even. Now, if the practice does not match the policy, then employees receive the wrong message. Okay. Now, the next step is to design the pay grades and pay ranges. This is usually done with base pay data. And since the base pay reflects the basic value of the work rather than the performance level of the employees. Now, why bother with grades and ranges? Grades and ranges offer flexibility. Flexibility to deal with pressures from the external markets and differences among organizations. So, what are these differences? Differences in quality, in terms of skills, in terms of abilities, and in terms of experience. And then differences in the productivity or value of those quality variations. Now, and the differences in the mix of pay forms competitors that is going to be used. Now, a pay range exists whenever two or more rates are paid to employees of the same job. Now, ranges provides managers the opportunity to recognize the individual performance differences with pay. And then meet employees' expectation that their pay will increase over time, with the same job. And then encourage employees to remain with the organization. Now, from an internal alignment perspective, a range reflects the differences in performance or experience that an employer wishes to recognize with pay. Now, from the external competitiveness perspective, a range is a control device from the maximum and a range from the minimum. Now, develop grades. The first step in building flexibility into a pay structure is to group the different groups or different jobs that are considered substantially equal for pay structure into a grade. Now, the original job evaluation results are examined to slot similar jobs into one grade, and each grade will have its own pay range, and all the jobs within a single grade will have the same pay range. Now, the jobs in different grades should be dissimilar to those in other grades and will have a different pay range. Now, grades will enhance an organization's ability to move employees among different jobs within a grade without a change in pay. And grades are challenging to design actually, and if jobs are with relatively close job evaluation point, the total falls on either side of grades boundaries, and the magnitude of differences in the salary treatment may be out of proportion. Thus, to the magnitude of the difference in the value of the job content even. Now, in the establishing the range, midpoints, minimums, and maximums, what does it mean? Now, grades groups evaluation data on the horizontal axis ranges group salary data on the vertical axis. So that's the specification. Horizontal axis for the grades group evaluation. Now, a range has three features: midpoint, a minimum, and a maximum. So the midpoint of the range is where the pay policy line, the competitive pay level is being detected, that crosses the center of the grade. Now, the midpoint and range spread are used to calculate pay minimums and maximums. Now, what size should the range be? Okay, the size of the range is based on the judgment about how the ranges support the path of a career path, the promotions, and other organization systems. Now, the top level management positions typically have a range of 30 to 60% above and below the midpoint. Now, the large range values reflect the greater opportunity for individual discretion and performance variations in the work. Now, the entry to mid-level professional and managerial position typically has ranges of 15 to 30% above and below the midpoint. And office and production work typically have the ranges to from 5 to 15% above and below the midpoint. Now, some compensation managers use actual survey rates, particularly the 75th and the 25th percentiles, as the range minimums and maximums. Now, another approach is to establish the minimum and the maximum separately, with the amount between the minimum and the midpoint included. Now, the midpoint is calculated as the function of how long it takes a new employee to become fully competent. Now, the minimum would be closer to the midpoint for short training time. And then the maximum would be set above the midpoint depending on how much the organization is ready to pay for sustained performance. Okay? Now we go to overlap. A high degree of overlap and low midpoint differentials will indicate a small differences in the value of jobs in adjoining grades. Now, a promotion from one grade to another may include a title change, but not much change in pay. So there are factors like that. Now, range overlaps also will include smaller ranges creates less overlaps. And this will allow a larger pay increase to accompany promotion into a higher level grade. Now, promotion increases matter. Now, the size of differentials between grades should support career movement through the structure. Meaning, a managerial job is usually one grade higher than the job it supervises. And then, although a 15% differentials between manager and employee has been offered as a rule of thumb, large overlap and overtime requirements for non-managerial jobs often make it difficult to maintain manager-employee pay differentials. Now, determining the optimal overlap between grades is a judgment call. It should be large enough to induce employees to seek promotion into a higher grade. Now, not all employees use grades and ranges. Now, the skills-based plans establishes a single flat rate for each skill level regardless of performance or seniority. And this flat rate often correspond to some um, midpoint on the survey of the job. And then broad bands are increasingly being adopted for greater flexibility. Now, a broad band is a new technique. And this approach consolidates approximately 4 to 5 traditional pay grades into a single band with a minimum and one maximum. Now, since a band encompasses many jobs of differing values, a range midpoint is usually not specified. Now, supporters of broadbands list several the advantages of it. Now, what are the advantages? They provide flexibility to define job responsibilities more broadly. They support redesigned and downsized or boundary-less organizations that have eliminated layers of managerial jobs. Um, they foster cross-functional growth and development to employees. Now, employees can move laterally across functions within a band to gain depth of experience. Now, the emphasis on lateral movement is that with no pay adjustment, it will help manage the reality of fewer promotions in flattened organization structures. Now, the flexibility eases the mergers and the acquisitions since there are not a lot of levels to argue over. The most important difference between the grades and the ranges and the broad banding approaches is the location of controls. Now, the grade and the range approach has guidelines and controls that is designed into the pay system. And the band approach has only a total salary, the salary budget that adds constraints. Now, banding involves two steps. What are these? Number one is the set the number of bands. When you say set the number of bands, examples indicates the use of a 5 to 6 bands for pay purposes. Now, Merck as a company uses 6 bands for its entire pay structure. General Electric replaced 24 levels of work with 5 bands. Now, the challenge is how much to pay the employees who are in the same band, but different functions that is performing different work. Okay. Now, the number two is price the bands, referencing market rates. Now, each band will likely include multiple job families. Now, based on external market differences in pay rates, the different functions within each band are likely to be priced differently. Now, flexibility or control. Now, according to supporters, the principal payoff of broad banding is flexibility, since it encourages employees to move across functionally to increase cross fertilization of ideas. Now, career moves within bands are more common than between bands. Although this approach provides flexibility, but it is susceptible to chaos and favoritism. Now, the use of banding approach will presume managers will manage pay of their employees to achieve the objective of the organization and treat the employers fairly. Now, in today's challenge is to take the advantage of flexibility without increasing labor cost or leaving an organization vulnerable to a lot of changes that is inconsistent or has illegal practices. Now, how do we balance the external pressure? So, adjusting the pay structure. Now, up to this point, a distinction has been made between the job structure and the pay structure. Now, a job structure orders jobs on the basis of internal factors that are reflected in job evaluation or skills based on competency certification, while a pay structure is anchored by an organization's external competitive position and reflected in its pay policy line. Okay, so that's the difference. How do you balance it? Now, reconciling the differences, how do you do it? Now, using two standards, no, the internal and the external, in creating a structure may produce two different structures. The differences between market structures and rates and job evaluation rankings will require a review of the basic decisions in evaluating the pricing a specific job. Now, a review of the job analysis, the job evaluation of the job, and the market data for the job may be necessary to determine if a job was accurately evaluated or to account to differences between the internal evaluation and the market rate. Now, while reanalysis may resolve the problem, discrepancies may persist, and the results of one study will indicate differences are often reconciled by weighing external market data heavily than internal job evaluation data. Now, due to judgment that is going to be involved in the internal evaluation, so market data are often deemed to be more objective. However, no, there are findings based on research that indicates market data are also based on judgments. Now, sometimes differences arise because a shortage of a particular skills has driven up in the market when compared with its internal evaluation. Now, however, reclassifying a market-sensitive job into a higher salary grade creates additional problems. Therefore, creating a special range clearly designated as market responsive may be a better approach. Now, market pricing. So, how do we do that? So, many U.S. organizations have adopted pay strategies that will emphasize the external competitiveness and de-emphasize the internal alignment. And this approach, which is the market pricing, will set pay structures almost exclusively on external market rates. Now, the market pricers will match a large percentage of their jobs with market data and collect with much market data as possible. Now, the competitive rates for jobs for which the external market data are available are being calculated. And then the remaining, the non-benchmark, the remaining job are blended into the pay hierarchy that is created by the external rates. Okay. Now, the objective of market pricing is to base most of the internal pay structure on external rates and breaking down boundaries now between internal organization and external forces, market forces. And some companies even match all forms of pay mixes for each job to its market competitors. Now, business strategy, the pure market pricing approach will ignore the internal alignment completely and is aligned with competitors' decision as reflected in the market. Therefore, the decision of its competitors will determine an organization's pay. And then how much or what mix of forms of company pays is no longer considered a potential source of a competitive advantage. And the pay structure is no longer unique and easily imitable. Can be imitated easily. Now, fairness is presumed to be reflected by market rates. Employee behavior is presumed to be reinforced by totally market priced structures. Okay? Now, in contrast, an organization may choose to differentiate its pay strategy from that of its competitors to better execute its own strategy. Okay, organizations may choose different overall pay levels now, depending on the business strategy. Uh, okay, organizations can pay some of each job above market. In contrast, an organization may choose to differentiate its pay strategy form that of its competitors to better execute its own strategy. Now, organization may choose different overall pay level, as I said a while ago, and the organizations can pay some of its jobs above market and some jobs are below the market. Now, in summary, balancing internal and external pressures is a matter of judgment. De-emphasizing internal alignment may lead to unfair treatment among the employees and is inconsistency with the fundamental culture of the organization. However, neglecting external competitive pay practices will affect an organization's ability to attract and hire applicants who match its needs. And then external pay relationship also directly will impact the labor cost and thus the ability to compete in the product or service market. So there. I hope you understood some of the context of the chapter 8, and this is going to be yeah, a very good discussions for chapter 8 that tackles the designing on how to designing pay levels and understanding the mixes and its pay structures. See you again on our next chapter discussion. Thank you.